take apologetics classes. Secondly, we would go out on the streets and talk to strangers. And when you talk to strangers, I'll tell you in just a minute how we did it. But then the third thing is we were to stay back and pray for the other groups of people who were out there talking to the strangers. So those were the three components. Now, the component where we would have to go out to talk to strangers worked like this. We would go out there with a survey and a little booklet. And the survey had 3 questions on it. The first question was, do you believe it's possible to know God personally? The second question was, if someone asked you how they could know God personally, what would you say to them? And the third question was, if I were to tell you that I knew God personally, would you want to hear how? And we'd go out there and we'd talk to total strangers and we'd tell them this thing. And then if they said yes at the end of the third question, we would pull out the other little booklet. And the other little booklet said, how to know God personally. You know, it's answering the questions right there. And you would flip it open, and as you flip through the book, it would show you this guy standing on a cliff. And then in front of the cliff was the word sin, and it was just this big chasm, and sin was there. And then over here on this side, there was another cliff, and on top of that was God, and he was all shiny, because, you know, you can't draw a picture of God. Who knows what he's just a spirit. So he's all shiny, just a big G with, like, rainbows coming out of him. And so then here's this guy here, and then there was another picture where Jesus was right in the middle, and there was a cross drawn right in the middle. And you would say the only way, according to the Bible, the only way for us to get to know God is to cross with faith in Jesus and to put our faith and our trust on him. And then he moves us from one side to the other side when we trust in Jesus. Jesus is our bridge to God. And I would flip through the book and I would share this story with people. And then I'd say, so where are you? And most everybody would say, well, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. And I would say, well, I can't be there. That's where Jesus is, and it's a cross. So if you want to be there, sure, go ahead. But you're not. So where are you, do you think? And then they would say, well, then I guess I'm over here on this cliffside. And I would say, where do you want to be? And they would say, well, I'd like to be with God. And then I would flip over to the prayer in the back of the booklet. And I would say, there's a prayer here. Do you want to pray the prayer with me? And they'd say, okay. And so we'd pray. We'd pray this little prayer together. And so every day we would go out, and a third of our day was spent doing this kind of thing. And then we would come back together during our prayer time, and we would share our stories of the people we had talked to. And we'd go around the room, and every single person around the circle would say things like this. I talked to 5 people today, and all of them told me to take a hike. I talked to 6 people today, and 3 of them swore at me, and 2 of them didn't speak English. And I talked to, we'd go around the circle, and everybody would have these stories, and then it would get to me, and I'd be like, well, I talked to 5 people today, and 4 of them prayed the prayer with me. And literally during that process, like a lot of people were praying the prayer with me and not with others. And so I began to think, wait a minute, what's happening here? Is God somehow blessing me more than he's blessing all these other people in the room? Is God somehow using me and he's not using them? Or am I just a better salesman? And have I just convinced people that I will leave them alone if they pray this prayer with me? And to tell you the truth, I don't even know. And I went that whole week frustrated. Like, what's this all about? What's the point of me telling other people this message about Jesus if I have no idea if it's even sinking in or if it's even making a difference? Because obviously it can't be just that, I'm so awesome at presenting this message. I'm reading a booklet, and we all have the same booklet. So what's the deal here? And I just kind of grew skeptical and cynical all week long. And then at the end of the week, we had one last event. And this event was we were holding some type of like VBS program, big event for elementary school kids. And so we were the people putting on this elementary program. We put it on. We're having party stuff. We're eating party food. We're playing games with all these kids. And then at the end of the evening, our job as the teenagers was to go and find some elementary kid and just interact with them and start talking to them and see if we could get them into a conversation and lead them into the book. Like, okay, we've done this all week long. Let's just do it again, get it over with. So I found one kid. He was kind of off by himself, not really paying attention to anybody else. He wasn't really surrounded by it. He's just by himself. So I went over there. I was like, hey, how you doing? And I started talking to him. I said, do you think it's possible to know God personally? If someone asked you how to know God personally, what would you say? If I told you I knew how to know God personally, would you want me to tell you? And he goes, yes, and so I pull out the book and we go through the book and I share with him and he prays with me at the end of the book and I walk away and say, okay, I did it again. And then about 5 minutes later, I was off doing something else, trying to help clean up or whatever, and then I'm coming back through this other area and I see a crowd of kids, like 12 kids, all standing in a circle. and there's some dude in the middle of the circle, and I walk past the circle, and as I get past that circle, I look in there, and the guy that I had just talked to is standing in the middle of the circle with a little booklet with 12 guys all around him, and he's telling them the story of what he just experienced. And I was thinking, wow, maybe it has nothing to do with the salesmanship that I put forth. Maybe it has nothing to do with what book I use. Maybe it has everything to do with the fact that God did something in this kid's heart and it made a difference. And I walked away from that with the sense that God had just done something and I had a part to play in it somehow. Even in my reluctant skepticism, just by doing the faithful work of saying, here's a message I'm going to tell you about, wasn't even enthusiastic about it or anything, and then God does something. And this kid is now sharing with all these other kids that he knows. Remember, before he was all by himself, sitting all by himself. And now all of a sudden he has a crowd of people around him listening to him. There's an exact same story like that in John chapter 4. And I want you to see with me the power of a simple message being proclaimed to someone and that it refreshes people. But before we get there, there's this one verse in Proverbs I want you to see. It says this, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will himself be refreshed. My conviction is this. In terms of what the Bible teaches, refreshment comes when we refresh others. Refreshment comes when we refresh others. When you invest your life into a moment and then later find out that that moment made a difference in someone's life, it is the best feeling ever. When you've made a positive difference, a positive impact in someone else's life, nothing compares. I'm going to share with you this story in John chapter 4. If you're using the Bibles we passed out, it's on page 741. So flip over there with me. John 4. I'm going to read a few verses and we're going to stop along the way and we're going to make a few comments. But here's the bottom line. About a week ago in our starting point class, John chapter 4 makes a component. It's a component in our starting point class. And we got to it and I said, how many of you around the circle have ever heard the story of the woman at the well? And only about 3 or 4 people raised their hands. And so I thought, well, maybe it's about time that we talk about this. So we're going to talk about this one today. And since I'm limited on time, what we're going to do is I'm going to read through it, make a couple comments as we go, but I'm just going to give you a lot of blanks. And you're going to fill them in to give you the content of sort of the bullet points of the story. And then at the end, I'm going to pull it all together and tie it together in something, okay? So here we go. Now, Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now, he had to go through Samaria. Now, that's not really true. Because, see, here's Judea down here, and here's Galilee up here. And there's a region right here called Samaria. But no Jewish person would ever say, I have to go through Samaria. Because Samaria was the land of the half-breeds. Samaria was the land, see, when the northern kingdom of Israel got conquered and they all got shipped off to Assyria and other countries, the Assyrians brought in a whole bunch of other people to live in that area. And so the people living in that northern area that was called Samaria was really, it was partially Jew, partially Assyrian. It was just a mix, a conglomeration of these ancient groups of people all coming together. They worshipped an idol that was on the south end of the area, and they worshipped another idol on the north end of the area. They kind of had the Old Testament scriptures, but they changed all the words to be different things. They were just, everything about them was wrong and distasteful to a Jewish person. And so to get from here to here, you don't need to go up through there. You can go around. And every Jewish person who had the choice went around. But somehow John tells us they had to go through Samaria. And John, this Jewish person, would not have used that phrase unless someone had told him that. Perhaps Jesus. By the way, guys, today we have to go through Samaria. So they go. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. Draw your attention to our first blank here. Jesus, when they enter Samaria, is weary and hungry and thirsty. The whole story begins with Jesus being weary and hungry and thirsty. It must be good to know that we can relate to our Savior and He can relate to us. He's had those moments where He had to send other people away to go get Him some food, and He just needed to sit down by a well. And He asks the first person that comes, "Would you let me have some water?" He's weary, He's hungry, and He's thirsty. But notice one other thing. We kind of skipped over it. I read it, but it's at the end of verse 6. It's noon. Well, that makes perfect sense for Jesus. You know, it's lunchtime. That's why He's hungry. That's why He's thirsty. I'm beginning to feel a little hungry right now, you know? That's why it makes sense. It's noon, okay? So of course He's going to be hungry, but what doesn't make sense is why the woman is getting water. See, if you live in a society where you need to get water every day, and you need to go to the well to get that water, and the water doesn't just come to you in your pipes, when do you want the water? You want the water when it's the hottest, so you need to get the water before then. So in their society, what they always would do is all the women of the town would all take their jugs and they would go to the well at like 6 o'clock in the morning so they could get their water, bring it back to the house, and then when the sun got beaten down on the house and it all got warm and hot and everything, they would have the water all ready. And they didn't need to go out in the heat of the day to get the water from the well. Why is this woman at the well at noon? Well, of course, the only reason a woman would go to the well at noon is because if she went at 6, she'd hear what they were talking about. And she didn't want to hear those words again. She didn't want to see those faces again. And she knew that when she wasn't there, they were talking about her anyway, so why bother going? There's something going on in this story where we know from the simple fact that she's there at noon that she is avoiding the others. She must be ashamed and she must be evasive. This woman is ashamed and evasive. We see her evasive tendency in that right after Jesus says, "Will you give me something to drink?" the Samaritan woman, verse 9, says to him, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." This is amazing because many times I enter into a conversation with someone where I